Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone who joined us from around the world. We're so glad you're here. This is Andrew and Renee. Welcome to the Stack series.
It is wonderful to be back.
Today we are exploring the concept of evolutionary mismatch and the metabolic lessons we can learn from traditional and indigenous populations. And I have to say, going through this research stack, from the Royal Society to PLOS biology, I actually felt a sense of relief.
Relief, that's not the usual reaction when we're digging into chronic disease and metabolic dysfunction.
Well, yeah, relieved, because this whole topic feels like the ultimate, it's not you, it's the system conversation. We all walk around with this, guilt about our food cravings or our waistlines or that we can't fall asleep easily,
Right.
tend to internalize it, right, as a personal failing, a lack of willpower. But the research we're looking at today suggests there's a much bigger, much older conflict going on here.
That's a really sharp way to put it. The core tension we're examining is, for all intents and purposes, a hardware-software compatibility issue.
A hardware-software issue.
Exactly. To put it simply, we are living in a space-age world, but we're walking around in Stone-Age bodies. Our physiology, that's the hardware, was designed and refined over millions of years for a very specific environment.
Right.
But our modern environment, the software we're trying to run on that old hardware, it's changed so radically, so quickly, that the whole system is crashing.
And when you say crashing, you don't mean like a computer freezing. You mean something much more serious.
I mean actual pathology. The crash looks like type 2 diabetes. It looks like heart disease. It looks like chronic, low-grade inflammation. These aren't just random misfortunes happening to people. They are, in a very real sense, error messages from a biological system that is deeply confused by its surroundings.
Okay, so that's what we're going to unpack today. But I want to be really clear for everyone listening.
Yeah.
This isn't just another talk about the paleo diet that you see all over social media, is it?
Absolutely not.
This isn't just eat steak, lift rocks, grunt.
No, the commercial paleo trend is often a caricature of the real science. It's a marketing term, really. We're going to be looking at the actual physiological and microbial data, the hard science, from the few remaining hunter-gatherer and forager-horticulturalist societies left on Earth.
And those are?
We're focusing on the Hadza of Tanzania, the Tsimane of the Bolivian Amazon, and also the historical data we have from pre-westernized Okinawa.
And what I found so fascinating in the research is that the data is just full of paradoxes. This is what really hooked me. You've got the Tsimane, who have high levels of inflammation, but somehow have the healthiest hearts ever recorded. How does that work?
Right.
You've got the Hadza, who eat huge amounts of sugar, literal honey, but
Yeah.
with no diabetes. And then you have us in the West with a diet that seems to be causing an actual extinction event inside our own guts.
It really challenges almost everything we think we know about healthy eating. In some ways, it turns the entire food pyramid on its head.
Okay, so let's get into it. We've kind of structured our conversation today into 4 parts. We'll start with the foundations, what we think we know about this mismatch. Then we'll get into the active debate, where the science gets a little weird and contradictory.
It does.
Then the frontiers, the really cutting-edge microbiome stuff. And finally, we'll talk about the implications. What does this all mean, and what can we actually do about it?
That sounds like a solid plan. Let's start at the beginning.
So, foundations. This idea of evolutionary mismatch. Sounds almost philosophical, but in the papers, especially the PLOS biology paper, it's a very specific biological definition.
It is, yes. Evolutionary mismatch is defined as a state of disequilibrium. It happens when an organism, that's us, which evolved in one particular environment, is suddenly placed into a radically different one. The result is that certain traits, or phenotypes, that used to be helpful for survival, or were at least neutral, suddenly become harmful to our fitness.
Okay, that's the textbook definition. Could you give me a concrete example? How does a helpful trait become a harmful one?
The classic example is the thrifty genotype hypothesis, which the Vanderbilt source covers in depth. For, 99% of human history, calories were scarce. Food was unpredictable.
Famine was basically the default state, right?
Yeah.
Starvation was always a possibility.
Exactly. So through natural selection, we evolved a metabolism that is incredibly efficient at finding and storing energy. If you stumbled upon a source of calories, say a beehive full of honey or a tree laden with fruit, your body's job was to signal you to eat as much as you possibly could right now. That's the dopamine hit.
The craving.
The craving. And then, just as important, your body had to hold on to that energy, usually by storing it as body fat, to get you through the next inevitable period of scarcity.
So being able to gain weight easily was a superpower.
Oh.
It was the difference between surviving the dry season and not.
It was the ultimate survival feature. People who didn't have those thrifty genes, well, they likely didn't survive to pass them on. We are the descendants of the best fat stores in human history. But now you take that same genetic machinery and you drop it into a modern environment where calories are cheap, they're everywhere, and they're engineered to be hyperpalatable. We're literally swimming in energy. And suddenly, that survival feature becomes a bug. It manifests as obesity and type 2 diabetes.
It's like, I was thinking about moths. Moths evolved for millions of years to navigate by the moon, like a distant, constant light source. And it works perfectly in nature.
Yeah.
But then humans invent artificial lights, porch lights, street lamps. Now the moth uses that same ancient hardwired instinct, flies straight into a hot light bulb, and dies. The instinct didn't change. The environment did.
That is a perfect analogy. We are the moths, and the supermarket is the light bulb.
Hmm.
Our environment has shifted far faster than our biology can possibly adapt. Evolution works on the scale of tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of years. The drive-through has only been around for a few decades. We just haven't caught up.
And to really understand how far we've drifted, we need a baseline. We need to look at populations that are still living in a way that's, closer to that ancestral environment. Which brings us to the Hadza and the Tsimane. Let's properly meet these groups. Who are the Hadza?
The Hadza are a community of hunter-gatherers in northern Tanzania near a place called Lake Eyasi. They are, for our purposes, a proxy for our deep ancestral past. They represent how humans lived for the vast majority of our time on this planet.
No farming, no animals.
No agriculture, no livestock. They rely entirely on what they can hunt, gather, or forage from the land around them.
So what does that look like on a day-to-day basis? What's a typical lunch for a Hadza person?
Well, it depends entirely on the season, and this is a really critical point that comes up again and again in the research. Their diet is not static. In the wet season, they might eat a lot of berries, baobab fruit, and honey, but in the dry season, the diet shifts completely to more game meat and starchy tubers that they have to dig out of the ground.
So no strawberries in December for them. The diet is dictated by the ecosystem.
Precisely. They live by the rhythm of their environment.
And then we have the Tsimane.
Yes, the Tsimane live in the Bolivian Amazon. They're a bit different. They're forager-horticulturalists. So they do practice some small-scale farming things like plantains, rice, corn, but they also supplement that heavily with fishing and hunting game.
And their physical activity levels are, well, they're just off the charts compared to us. I remember reading the stats on the daily steps.
It's humbling, isn't it? The Tsimane engage in moderate to vigorous physical activity for most of the day. We're talking an average of 17,000 steps a day, and that includes the elderly. And these aren't steps on a flat, climate-controlled treadmill. This is hacking through jungle, carrying heavy loads, paddling canoes.
Yeah, comparing that to the average Westerner is almost a joke. I mean, I'm sitting in a chair for most of my day.
It's a stark contrast, and it highlights the other side of the mismatch. Not just what we eat, but how little we move. The standard American diet, often abbreviated as SAD, which is ironically appropriate, is defined by being very high in energy density but very low in nutrient density.
So lots of calories, but not much else.
Exactly. We eat a lot of calories that don't carry much useful biological information. Ancestral diets are the complete opposite. Very high in nutrient density. But the energy availability fluctuates. Sometimes there's a lot, sometimes there's very little.
There was one specific ratio in the sources that really blew my mind. The omega-6 to omega-3 ratio. We hear about omegas all the time in supplement ads, but what's the actual evolutionary story here? Why does this specific balance matter so much?
This is a critical piece of the mismatch puzzle. Historically, as humans, we evolved eating a diet where the ratio of omega-6 to omega-3 fatty acids was about 1-to-1, or maybe 2-to-1 at most.
So for every molecule of omega-6 we ate about one molecule of omega-3. Perfectly balanced.
Correct. But today in Western populations, that ratio is estimated to be closer to 20-to-1.
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 Yeah.
We're consuming 20 times more omega-6s than omega-3s. And this is coming largely from the industrial seed oils, soybean oil, corn oil, sunflower oil that are absolutely ubiquitous in processed foods.
Okay, so the number is way off. But why does that matter inside the body? Is it just a numbers game, or does it cause a real physical change?
It matters profoundly because these fatty acids are not just calories, they are structural components. They become the building blocks of the membranes around every single cell in your body.
So our cell walls are literally built out of the fats we eat.
Literally. And here's the key difference. Omega-3s create flexible, fluid cell membranes. Omega-6s in excess create more rigid, stiff membranes. But the signaling is even more important. Broadly speaking, omega-6s are the precursors to pro-inflammatory molecules.
Fire alarm.
Exactly. You need them. Inflammation is how your body heals a cut or fights an infection. It's a vital, acute response. But omega-3s are the precursors to anti-inflammatory molecules. They're the fire extinguisher. They resolve the inflammation and tell the system to stand down.
So at a 1-to-1 ratio, the system works perfectly. You get an injury, the alarm goes off, the immune system does its job, and then the extinguisher comes and puts the fire out.
That's the elegant system we evolved with. But at 20-to-1, well, the fire alarm is blaring constantly, and the fire extinguisher is basically empty. We end up in a state of chronic, low-grade inflammation. The body is constantly on high alert, reacting to a perceived threat that isn't actually there. And this chronic inflammation is the fertile soil in which almost all modern metabolic diseases grow.
Heart disease, cancer,
Alzheimer's.
you name it, it's often at the root.
So we have this fundamental mismatch. We're programmed to store fat, but we live in a 247 convenience store. We're programmed for balanced inflammation, but our diet keeps that fire alarm ringing all day long. This sets the stage perfectly for what you called the active debate. Because when scientists actually go and look at the Tsimane, things get, well, they get really weird.
They do. This is where the simple, popular narratives about health start to fall apart.
Okay, so the Tsimane in the Amazon. The sources, especially the Lancet paper, highlights something they call the inflammation paradox. Can you break this down? Because based on everything you just said, if you have high inflammation, you should be pretty sick. That's the logical assumption, and it's the bedrock of a lot of modern cardiology. High levels of C-reactive protein, or CRP, a key marker of inflammation in the blood, is considered a major risk factor for heart attacks. If your doctor sees your CRP is high, they get worried.
Right. The simple story is inflammation damages the arteries, which allows plaque to build up and eventually, bang, a heart attack.
Well, the Tsimane consistently show extremely high levels of inflammation. Their CRP levels are often chronically elevated. By any Western medical standard, their cardiovascular systems should be a complete disaster.
They're not.
They're the opposite of a disaster. It's astonishing. When researchers took CT scanners deep into the Bolivian jungle to measure the amount of plaque in their arteries, they found that the Tsimane have the lowest levels of coronary artery disease ever recorded in any human population.
Ever. You mean lower than super fit marathon runners or strict vegans in California?
Yep, ever recorded. The study famously noted that an 80-year-old Tsimane man has the arteries of a typical 50-year-old American. They essentially do not get heart disease, despite living in a state of high inflammation.
That just doesn't compute. It feels like a total contradiction. If inflammation causes heart disease, and they have high inflammation, why are their hearts completely protected?
That's the paradox. The leading hypothesis is that the nuance lies in the type of inflammation they're experiencing. The Tsimane have high inflammatory markers because their immune systems are constantly active, fighting off parasites and pathogens from their environment. We're talking hookworms, roundworms, various bacteria.
So it's an appropriate immune response.
It's acute or reactive inflammation. The immune system is doing its specific job against a known external invader.
As opposed to the kind of sterile inflammation that we have in the West.
Precisely. In the West, we have sterile chronic inflammation. It's not caused by a worm. It's caused by obesity, by that skewed omega ratio, by psychological stress, by a leaky gut lining. It's inflammation without an invader. And it seems the body handles these two states very differently.
So you're saying the body somehow knows the difference between I'm fighting a parasite and I just ate a whole pizza and a liter of soda.
The evidence points in that direction, and of course, we can't ignore the other protective factors. The Tsimane have incredibly low LDL cholesterol, typically around 70 mg/dL, which is considered optimal, and as we said, they're incredibly active. It seems that if your lipids are low enough and you're constantly moving and flushing your system with high blood flow, the inflammation from parasites just doesn't seem to stick to the artery walls and form plaque.
So just to be crystal clear for everyone listening, getting a tapeworm is not the secret to a healthy heart.
I would strongly advise against that interpretation, yes. The lesson is that inflammation is not one single thing. And the modern, sterile kind we experience is likely far more damaging to our vascular system than the constant immune challenges our ancestors faced.
It almost suggests our immune systems are bored. They evolved to fight off real threats. And now that there are no worms to fight, they start attacking our own arteries when provoked by a bad diet.
That's a fascinating and frankly slightly disturbing way to think about it. But yes, that's one line of thinking in immunology.
Okay, let's move to another debate that drives people crazy online.
Yeah.
Carbohydrates. If you listen to the modern paleo or keto advocates, carbs are public enemy number one. They
Yeah.
spike insulin, they make you store fat, they're inflammatory. But then I look at the Hadza and the Okinawans, and they eat a lot of
Or a
carbs.
lot of carbs. This
Yeah.
is one of the most widespread misunderstandings of evolutionary nutrition. The Hadza, as we mentioned, during their honey season, consume massive amounts of simple sugars.
Liquid sugar, basically.
Oh. And the traditional Okinawans, who, remember, were one of the longest-lived, healthiest populations on Earth, their diet was about 85% carbohydrates by calories.
85%. That's a high-carb diet by any definition. That's what a marathon runner eats before a race.
It is. But the key, as always, is context and source. The Okinawans were not eating 85% of their calories from white bread and pasta. They were eating the purple sweet potato.
And the Hadza are eating raw honey and fibrous tubers.
Exactly.
So what is the biological difference between a sweet potato and, say, a bagel? I mean, at the chemical level, isn't sugar just sugar?
Not to your body, it isn't. The key distinction is between cellular and acellular carbohydrates. In a whole food, like a sweet potato or a tuber, the carbohydrate molecules are encased within a fibrous plant cell matrix. Your digestive system has to physically work to break down those cell walls to get to the energy inside. It's a slow, steady release of sugar into the bloodstream, a trickle. A bagel, on the other hand, is acellular. We already done all the work for the body. We've obliterated the plant cell walls by milling it into a fine powder. When you eat it, the sugar hits your bloodstream almost instantly. It's a flood, not a trickle.
And that flood requires a massive insulin response to manage.
A huge response. But there's another crucial factor, which the sources call metabolic context.
This is the idea of earning your carbs.
That's a great way to put it. Eating a sweet potato before you walk 5 miles to hunt or work in a field is a completely different physiological event than eating a donut while sitting at a desk for 8 hours.
Because your muscles are primed and ready to soak up all that glucose for fuel.
Precisely. The Tsimane and Hadza are incredibly insulin sensitive because their muscles are constantly demanding fuel. You can get away with eating a lot of carbs if you are actively using them. The mismatch occurs when we combine high-energy acellular carbs with a sedentary lifestyle. It's like overfilling the gas tank of a car that's just parked in the garage. The fuel has nowhere to go, so it spills over and causes damage, in our case, inflammation and fat storage.
So it's not the macronutrient itself, it's the matrix it comes in, the fiber and the movement that accompanies it.
Context is everything, yes.
Let's stick with the Okinawans for a moment, because there's another theory about their longevity. It wasn't just what they ate, but also how much. This concept of hara-hachi-bu.
Yes, hara-hachi-bu is a Confucian teaching that translates roughly to eat until you are 80% full. The research suggests that the older generation of Okinawans, the ones who became centenarians, were effectively practicing a form of mild caloric restriction for about half of their adult lives.
Now, was that an intentional Zen-like practice of self-control, or was it just that they were, well, kind of poor and food wasn't always abundant?
That's the heart of the debate. It was likely a combination of a cultural practice born from a reality of mild scarcity. They didn't have an all-you-can-eat buffet. But regardless of the intent, the biological result was clear. Caloric restriction, when done without malnutrition, is one of the most robust ways to extend lifespan in nearly every species studied. It activates cellular repair pathways like autophagy, where your cells essentially clean house and recycle damaged parts.
But there's a tragic update to the Okinawan story in the sources. And for me, this is the absolute smoking gun that proves genetics are not the whole story.
It is a profound and sad natural experiment. After World War II, Okinawa became heavily westernized. American military bases were established, and with them came the Western diet.
Fast food.
Fast food chains like KFC became incredibly popular. As the younger generation shifted away from the traditional diet of purple sweet potatoes and fish, that incredible longevity advantage has completely evaporated.
And not just evaporated, it's actually reversed, hasn't it?
It has. The life expectancy for Okinawan men has now dropped below the Japanese national average.
That's the clearest evidence of mismatch you could possibly ask for. Same genetics, same island, but a different food environment leads to a completely different health outcome in the span of a single generation.
It totally dismantles the argument that these long-lived populations just have good genes. Their genes were only good within the protective context of their traditional environment. When you change the environment, the genetic protection vanishes. It's a stark warning for all of us.
So we've looked at the hardware, our ancient bodies, and the software, our modern environment. But there's a third critical player in this whole system that we have to talk about. Bugs. The microbiome. This is the frontiers section of our conversation, and honestly, the data on the Hadza gut is just mind-blowing. It makes me feel like I'm walking around with a barren, depleted wasteland inside me.
It is a very sobering comparison. The papers on this paint a picture of the microbiome that is completely different from how we tend to view it in the West. We think of our gut bacteria as a fairly stable garden. You kind of have what you have.
Right? I take a probiotic, I eat some yogurt, and I hope for the best.
But in the Hadza, the microbiome isn't a static garden. It's a dynamic, shifting ecosystem. It cycles dramatically with the seasons.
Wait, you're saying their gut bacteria actually change with the weather?
They change with their diet, which changes with the weather. In the wet season, when they're eating a lot of berries and honey, the bacterial species that love to ferment sugars and simple carbohydrates, they bloom, they flourish. But in the dry season, when the diet shifts to more meat and tubers, those sugar-loving bacteria die back, and other species that are better at handling proteins and complex fibers take over.
So they swap out their microbial toolkit depending on the job at hand.
To such an extent that the researchers found that entire species of bacteria would completely disappear from the Hadza gut during one season, only to miraculously reappear in the next.
They go into hiding. Where they go?
The theory is that they drop to undetectable levels, perhaps forming spores, and then they bloom again as soon as their preferred food source comes back into the environment. This is called plasticity. Their microbiome is incredibly flexible and resilient. It can handle change.
In ours.
Ours has lost this plasticity.
Yeah.
We eat the same processed foods year-round. A tomato in December is bred to taste the same as a tomato in July. We don't have that seasonal cycling. And the really scary part, which the Stanford Medicine study alludes to, is that we may be experiencing a mass extinction event in our guts.
This is the mouse study, isn't it? This one really disturbed me. Can you walk us through what they did?
It's a landmark study. Researchers took mice that were colonized with a human microbiome and put them on a low-fiber, Western-style diet. And as you'd expect, the diversity of their gut bacteria plummeted. Many species died off because they literally had no fiber to eat.
Okay, that makes sense. You starve them, they die, but then they put the mice back on a high-fiber diet. Did the bacteria come back?
In that first generation of mice, some of them did. But here is the critical, terrifying part of the experiment. They kept breeding the mice. Over multiple generations raised on that low-fiber diet, those bacterial species didn't just shrink in number, they went extinct. They were gone. And even when the researchers reintroduced a high-fiber diet to the great-grandchild mice, those lost bacteria did not return.
Because their parents didn't have them to pass down at birth.
Exactly. We inherit our foundational microbiome from our mothers during birth and breastfeeding. If an entire generation eats a low-fiber diet and loses certain species, they cannot pass those species on to their children. They are lost from the lineage. The study strongly suggests that we might be living with depleted biomes that are permanently missing some of the ancestral machinery needed to process healthy foods.
So we're walking around with a simplified ecosystem inside of us.
Yeah.
It's like a complex, resilient rainforest that's been clear-cut and turned into a cornfield. A cornfield is very vulnerable to disease and pests.
That is the perfect analogy. And we're seeing the consequences of that vulnerability in the explosion of allergies, autoimmune diseases, and inflammatory bowel disorders.
There was another study on the Hadza that looked not just at the bacteria, but at something called metabolomics. Now, can you explain that for us? Is this just a high-tech way of looking at what's in their poop?
It is, in a way, but it's very sophisticated poop analysis. Metabolomics looks at the metabolites, the thousands of chemical byproducts of metabolism. It's like analyzing the exhaust coming out of a car's tailpipe to understand exactly how the engine is running. The study compared the chemical signals in Hadza stool versus Italian stool, which represented a typical Western diet.
And I'm guessing the exhaust fumes were a little different.
Radically different. Let's break down some of the findings. The Hadza profile was enriched in something called hexoses. These are simple sugars. Now that sounds bad, but remember, they eat a ton of fiber. This means their gut bacteria are so efficient at breaking down complex fiber that they're actually releasing simple sugar molecules in the colon, which the body or other bacteria can then use for clean energy.
So they are literally turning indigestible fiber into fuel.
Yes. They also had high levels of sphingolipids and glycerophospholipids. These are types of structural fats. Think of them as the mortar between the buffs of your gut lining. Seeing them in the stool suggests a high turnover and constant repair and maintenance of a healthy, strong gut barrier.
Okay, so that's the healthy engine. What about the Western engine's exhaust?
The Western profile was depleted in those good fats, but it was full of undigested amino acids and something called biogenic amines.
Amino acids come from protein. Why is it bad to have protein in your stool?
Because it should have been absorbed higher up in the digestive tract. If you have a lot of undigested amino acids reaching your colon, it means your digestion is inefficient. Or worse, it means the bacteria in your gut are fermenting protein instead of fiber.
Ah.
This process is called putrefaction.
That sounds exactly as bad as it is.
It is. Putrefaction produces toxic inflammatory byproducts like ammonia and hydrogen sulfide. The study also found a marker of oxidative stress and gut inflammation called nitrotyrosine in the Western group that was completely absent in the Hadza.
So, if I can summarize,
Mm.
the Hadza gut is a fiber fermenting factory that produces clean energy and keeps the gut wall strong and sealed,
Hmm.
while the Western gut is often a putrefaction factory that rots undigested protein and creates toxic inflammatory signals.
That's a very vivid but scientifically accurate summary. It shows that our diet doesn't just change who is living in our gut, but what they are doing. It changes their behavior.
Okay, so we've sufficiently depressed everyone about the state of their internal ecosystem. Let's try to look for some hope. Most of us can't move to Tanzania or the Amazon. Is there a Western version of a traditional diet that actually works? The sources mention the Atlantic diet and the Nordic diet.
Yes, and this is a really important point. Ancestral or traditional doesn't have to mean tropical. You don't need to eat baobab fruit to be healthy. The JAMA source discusses the Atlantic diet, which is traditionally from the Galicia region of Spain and northern Portugal.
I always just hear about the Mediterranean diet. How is the Atlantic diet different?
It's similar in principle, but it's adapted to a colder, wetter climate. It involves a lot of fresh fish, especially cod, some red meat in moderation, dairy, potatoes, and a heavy emphasis on brassica vegetables, things like cabbage, kale, and turnip greens. They also use olive oil and drink wine in moderation.
And what were the results of the trial they did?
The Galliot trial was a very rigorous, randomized clinical trial. It showed that families who adopted this diet had a significant reduction in their risk of developing metabolic syndrome. It lowered their belly fat, improved their cholesterol, and reduced their insulin resistance. It's an incredibly protective way of eating.
Okay, and then you have the Nordic diet, which is for people even further north in Scandinavia.
Exactly. If you live in Canada or Northern Europe, olive oil isn't exactly a local food. The Nordic diet focuses on things that grow there. Berries like blueberries and lingonberries, whole grain rye bread, canola oil from rapeseed, and lots of root vegetables.
So rye and potatoes are back on the menu, carbs again?
Carbs again, but they're whole fibrous carbs eaten in a traditional context. And again, the studies show the Nordic diet improves lipid profiles and insulin sensitivity. The big takeaway here is that healthy isn't one specific dogmatic menu, it's a theme. It's a pattern of eating whole, unprocessed, local foods that retain their cellular structure. Whether that's a mango in the Amazon or a turnip in Sweden, the underlying principle is the same.
Before we move on to the final section, I just have to ask about the skin study. Because we usually talk about diet for heart health or weight loss, but the Journal of Integrative Dermatology source mentions something called skin span.
This connects right back to the Okinawans and the Nordic diet. The study suggests that the very same nutrients that protect your heart also protect your skin. Specifically, compounds called anthocyanins, that's the deep purple pigment in purple sweet potatoes and berries, and omega-3 fatty acids seem to protect your collagen from degradation.
So it's like an internal sunscreen or anti-wrinkle cream.
In a way, yes. Anthocyanins have been shown to reduce the collagen breakdown caused by UV radiation from the sun. And omega-3s, as we discussed, dampen the inflammation that breaks down the skin's structure over time. So the concept of beauty from within isn't just a marketing slogan, it's a biological reality. If you reduce systemic inflammation through your diet, your skin will age more slowly.
It makes perfect sense when you think about it. Your skin is your body's largest organ. If your arteries are inflamed, it stands to reason your skin is probably inflamed too.
Precisely. The skin is very often a mirror of what's happening in the gut and the rest of the body.
Okay, we've covered the science, the history, the diets, but now we have to talk about the implications. Because there's a darker ethical side to how some of this research is collected. The sources bring up the problem of helicopter research.
This is a critical ethical issue. For decades, Western scientists have, in a sense, flown into indigenous communities like the Hadza or the Orang Asli in Malaysia, taken samples of their blood, their hair, their microbiome, and then just left.
They get the data, they publish the big paper in a fancy journal, they get tenure, and what does the community get in return?
Often, nothing at all. They're treated as subjects to be studied, not as partners in the research. The sources really highlight the profound irony that while we are studying them to solve our diseases of affluence, like obesity and heart disease, these very same communities are often suffering from infectious diseases, a lack of access to clean water, or just basic health care.
There was that example about the Orang Asli in Malaysia that just laid this disconnect bare.
Yes. Researchers were there studying their unique genetics to understand lipid metabolism, but at the same time, the community had huge gaps in health education about simple things like hand washing to prevent infections or how to treat head lice. The point being made is that true frontier science has to be equitable. We need to give back. That could be medical infrastructure, it could be education, or it could be simply respecting their data sovereignty and letting them have a say in how their biological information is used.
Also ironic because we're looking to them for ancient wisdom, yet our model of research often ignores the strengths-based knowledge they already possess. Things like community connection, resilience, a deep understanding of their local ecology.
We have so much to learn from them, not just to extract from them. It has to be a reciprocal relationship.
And speaking of costs, there's a massive economic argument for fixing this mismatch in our own societies.
The economic burden is astronomical. The sources outline how the explosion of type 2 diabetes and obesity is on track to bankrupt the healthcare systems of developed nations. We simply cannot afford to keep treating the downstream symptoms of this mismatch. But it also talks about the double burden that is now plaguing developing nations.
What is the double burden?
It's a tragic situation where a country is facing high rates of both malnutrition and obesity at the same time, sometimes even in the same household. As cheap, Western processed food floods into these markets, you get children who are stunted from a lack of protein and micronutrients, but they are simultaneously becoming overweight or obese from an excess of empty calories, refined flour, and sugar.
Wow. So it's the worst of both worlds. The nutritional scarcity of the past combined with the toxic abundance of the present.
Exactly. It creates an incredibly complex public health nightmare that is very, very difficult to solve.
Okay, so we have laid it all out. We are mismatched. We are inflamed. Our gut bacteria are going extinct. But we can't end this on a note of complete doom and gloom. The person listening to this right now needs to know what to do. How do we apply the wisdom of the Hadza and the Okinawans without having to, move into a yurt and hunt our own dinner?
We can distill all of this complex research down to 5 practical, actionable takeaways. These are the main levers that we can actually pull in our modern lives to start correcting the mismatch.
Okay, let's hear them. Number 1.
Fiber diversity. And the key word there is diversity. It's not just about eating more fiber. It's about eating many different kinds of fiber. The goal is to feed all the different specialist species in your gut to prevent that extinction event we talked about. A common target you'll see is aiming for 30 different plant foods per week. These are what scientists call MACs, microbiota accessible carbohydrates. If you feed them, they thrive and produce all those beneficial anti-inflammatory compounds for you.
30 different plants a week sounds like a lot, but that includes herbs and spices and things like that, right?
It does, yes. A sprinkle of oregano, a handful of blueberries, an onion, some garlic, a few different types of nuts and seeds. It adds up much faster than you think. It just forces you to get out of the rut of eating the same 3 vegetables every week.
Okay, makes sense. Number 2.
Omega balance. We have to fix that 20-to-1 ratio in our cell membranes. This means being very mindful about reducing processed seed oils, which are the primary source of excess omega-6, and actively increasing our intake of omega-3s. That means things like fatty fish, salmon, mackerel, sardines, or algae oil if you're plant-based. The goal is to get that ratio back down closer to 2-to-1 or 1-to-1 to turn off that constant inflammation fire alarm.
Got it. Number 3.
Seasonal eating. To the best of your ability, try to mimic the Hadza cycling. Don't eat the exact same foods 365 days a year. If it's summer and berries are in season where you live, eat more berries. If it's the middle of winter, focus more on root vegetables and hearty stews. Simply varying your diet throughout the year forces your microbiome to remain flexible and plastic.
It breaks the monotony for your internal bugs.
Precisely.
Number 4 is my favorite. because it gives me an excuse to get up and move.
Activity context. Earn your carbs. If you're going to eat a meal with dense cellular carbohydrates like potatoes or rice or fruit, try to do it around physical activity. Go for a walk before or after. Use your muscles as a glucose sink to soak up that sugar from your bloodstream so it doesn't float around causing problems. Mimic the Tsimane move, then eat.
And to the final one, number 5.
Community. We didn't spend as much time on this, but it's a huge consistent factor in the data from the Okinawans and the Hadza. Social connection is a powerful metabolic regulator. Studies show that loneliness and social isolation increase inflammatory markers just as much as a bad diet does. Eating together, sharing food, laughing, this is part of a traditional diet too. We can't forget that piece.
That is such a powerful note to end on. We get so focused on the molecules, the carbs, the fats, the microbes, that we forget about the meal itself, the actual act of breaking bread with people you care about.
Indeed, evolution made us social creatures just as much as it made us hungry ones.
So we've traveled from the ancient savanna to the modern supermarket. We've identified the deep mismatch. The takeaway seems to be that our bodies aren't broken. It's that the instruction manual they run on is ancient, and the world we've built is brand new. But by understanding where we came from, we can start to hack the modern system. We can reintroduce the signals our old genes expect to see: whole foods, constant movement, deep community, and maybe, just maybe, we can avoid the crash.
Well said. It is all about aligning our modern software with our ancient hardware.
Before we wrap up, thank you to all our partners, sponsors, and scholars who made this podcast and the research possible. We're truly grateful for your support.
And to our listeners, thank you for being part of this journey with us. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to subscribe and follow Stax Studios for more informative content and support us on Patreon.
Until next time, stay curious, keep learning, and let the search for wisdom guide you forward. Have a great day.